product owner of Scrum.org. Dave, what will you be talking about today?
I'm going to share, I know it's very old school, but this is the last session. So I'm going to be talking about value, which is a really weird topic. Some of you may be aware of the Scrum Guide updates last year. And that took over my life for about a year. And, I used to have hair before the Scrum Guide, I think, updates. But part of the drive to updating the Scrum Guide was because of the use of Scrum now. It's a lot more than just software development teams. It's a lot more than trying to build great software and be more professional in the discipline of software. It's something much, much larger. I'll talk quite a lot about this in a moment. But that motivated a sort of reorientation of the Scrum Guide to be more about value, about outcomes, about impact. And it's been very clear since the Scrum Guide was launched that maybe the world doesn't use Scrum in that way. And I think there's a realization that I've definitely been having, and it all started actually in Brazil almost 2 years ago now when I was in Sao Paulo for a week, that people use Scrum with an industrial mindset, which isn't necessarily bad. Don't get me wrong. Your situations are usually incredibly difficult and all sorts of stuff going on. So I'm not trying to judge, but that industrial mindset can end up not necessarily giving you some of the benefits and some of the power of professional Scrum and what Scrum can do and what Agile can do. So what I'm going to be talking about, or doing my best to talk about, is really why, what, how, and some of the tells that I've been seeing around how Scrum's being used today, and then maybe some of the mechanisms that we can use to not necessarily revolutionize our approach to Scrum, but at least start, sort of trying some things that are a little bit different. So hopefully that's what I'm going to be talking about, if that's okay with everybody. For about 45 minutes, time for some questions. We'll whiz through some stuff and see where we go. And I also appreciate that, obviously, because I can only speak English, which is awful, and I apologize for that. I also get excited and talk very quickly. Feel free to say, hey, Dave, stop. Don't be shy. And for the people that are maybe listening to this, so tall, bald English, sitting in a room in Cape Cod today, because it's Memorial Day weekend, wearing a blue shirt with a little Scrum.org logo on it. So if you're listening, I think that's important. Okay, let's have a go at this, shall we? You know who Scrum.org is. I'm not going to bore you with that. It would appear that to run Scrum.org, you have to be bald. So if anybody's there, Stefan, you're doing a great job. Maybe you could replace me at some point. No, that's seriously founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, signatory of the Agile Manifesto, creator along with some other people of Agile Alliance, then Scrum Alliance, and now Scrum.org, global community. Stefan is one of them. There's a bunch of PSTs all over the road, about 340. You know that, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But I am going to start with something to set the scene, because it's Friday, it's late. I'm keeping you from going to the bars, or if you're in lockdown, going to the drinks cabinet. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to just set the scene. So over the last 18 months, it's become very apparent that the organizations that are digital first have managed to survive the pandemic better than anybody. And it's been very apparent that we're currently in a transition from what would be described as the industrial age, the age of oil and mass production, to something else. And somebody that writes about it is a lady called Khalida Perez. She's a Venezuelan, but she lives in London now and teaches at London School of Economics. Amazingly intelligent lady who really describes these technology ages. And her book, Technology Revolutions of Financial Capital, is an economist book. So if you have trouble sleeping, it might be the aid you're looking for. But it's really insightful in some of these inflection points. And the reason why I bring it up is because I think COVID-19 has really been the accelerator that's changing the world. I think it's COVID-19 has been awful, and many people have died, and it's fundamentally changed lots of things that are awful. But one thing that it has is it's pointed a light, as it were, on the way in which people work, how we describe value, what motivates us, what our relationships are. It really has pointed this spotlight on us. And a friend of mine, Mick Kirsten, wrote a really interesting book he believes, and I agree with him, is that COVID-19 has been that turning point that's driven us to the deployment age of this digital age, this next post-industrial age. And that really means lots of really interesting things. I want to bring these up because I think they really help set the scene for when I start talking about value and why it's so important, and why you can see why Scrum historically has been used in a different way than maybe we can perhaps start using it in the future. And if you look on that left side, long-term investment planning horizons, I know you'd think that scrum.org wouldn't have long-term investment and planning horizons. But as I was in my office this week, one of the first times in a while, I saw the roadmap for 2020. Yeah, we didn't do that. Ultimately now we've moved to a rolling plan model, an investment model, where we're 90 days out. We learned that last year because of COVID, and ultimately we're not going to go back because the market changes at a rapid pace. Might be because we have new opportunities in Africa or in China or Japan, or it might be because we see these new ideas have sort of come to the fore, maybe around lean startup or design thinking or something, or management 3.0, that we want to incorporate. UX is one thing that we did, or Kanban or whatever. These things are continuously happening around us. So because of that, we need to plan in that way. We also have seen, and this hasn't affected Scrum.org as much, but our customers have really started to think about how teams are aligned. The most effective organizations through the pandemic were ones where their teams were clearly aligned to customers, clearly aligned to, or grouped into some sort of product or value stream, whether it's Nexus or Tribes or whatever. They were all pushing towards that. They had a very line of sight to the goal and to the customer that they were trying to influence. They were the most successful. And what we've seen is that the investment model that projects created, and this work orientation that, the industrial age mindset around huge projects, big capital investments, was not necessarily the most effective when dealing with this level of change. Scarcity versus abundance. And you might say, well, I don't feel very abundant at the moment, Dave. I feel like I'm sitting in my bedroom, and I have been for a year, dealing with my kids on remote learning. I feel actually the exact opposite. But ultimately, you have the power to watch any TV show you want, right? We have a website that over 1 million people come to every month that's running on AWS, and it costs $1,300. We can scale rapidly. There's the Broad Institute in Cambridge is a well-known story about how quickly they built a COVID test lab in 5 days, and they were not in that business. An amazing Scrum Master there, Agile coach there, set up a lab in 5 days. Now, as it happens, the local economy couldn't use it because of insurance and privacy and all these things. But my son's school could. So they went back to in-person learning a long time before anybody else, which was incredibly important for my little one, and perhaps more important for his mother and his dad as well. But the point is that we live in this world of the art of the possible. We can do amazing things. Specialization of labor, cross-functional teams, we all know that. We've been probably talking about that all day, right? Process control, self-organizing management is king, days of the creator. The last one is actually very interesting, and particularly in America, where, if you look back at the sort of Dick Van Dyke Show and that sort of idea of the 50s, and this, you got promoted and then you bought a car and a this and you sent your kids to college, and it was this sort of aspiration that maybe some of our political leaders are still sort of wax lyricaling about. The world was fabulous in the 50s or whatever. The idea of manager was, you became a manager and then a senior manager and all that. The word manager was a status thing. And ultimately, what we're seeing, particularly in the tech hubs, Silicon Valley, or Austin, Texas, Nashville, places like that are growing, and increasingly in Boston as well, particularly in biotech, the creator is more important than the manager. Now, saying that managers is going away, and obviously you had an interesting talk about that, but ultimately the role, their importance, their significance, it's all about these cross-functional teams aligned to customers, given direction and a mission. That's the future. So you can see see that if, as we wrestle with these industrial ideas, as we move into this age of digital or this next age, that there's friction points that are really, really interesting. And ultimately, I think this is perhaps why this sort of level of change that we're seeing. No surprise, so if this is the future, if we are in this age where change is continuously as we sort of navigate into this post-industrial sort of way of approaching work, of organizing, of delivering capital through planning, etc., then what does that really mean? Well, it means something really simple that all of you would instantly say. You align around your customers and the outcomes you're trying to achieve. You deliver frequently because they need to be continuously providing feedback, and you're not quite sure they're not quite sure what they want until they get it, or your competitors or whatever. The market dictates that, and you have to be agile because everything's going to bloom change, right? We get that. So, oh my gosh, bit of agile manifesto stuff. Delivering value to customers is our number one priority. Okay, yeah, duh. A bit of Simpsons there. Yeah, isn't that what we've always been doing? And isn't that what Scrum's all about? Isn't that what traditional PMI type project management and, isn't that what we've always been doing, right? Yeah, maybe, perhaps, but, and I'm not meant to say yes, but I'm always meant to say yes, and apparently it closes conversations where you say yes, but, so I'm trying to avoid saying that, but let's just do it just this once. And if you bear with me for a moment, then why does everyone involved have a different measure of success? Okay. Well, no, that's not true. No, we all care about the project. Well, really? So why was Fred, what's Fred's KPIs, or what was in his review, or what was Betty's key success criteria, and what motivates? And why is everybody different in that regard? Well, it's because we're, cross-functional team, matrix, all that. Oh, okay. Why are no customer personas on the wall? And this was really, so I was in Brazil. I was going to mention this 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And Brazil's a long way from Boston, right? Sao Paulo, even though it's on the same time zone, which is really confuses me every time, or virtually the same time zone, it's just this long way down. I didn't realize how big that whole Central and South American malarkey was. Because I'm England, and in English, you can go in like 20 minutes, you can be in a completely different part of the country. So I said, I'm going to go for a week. Fair enough. I'm speaking at a couple of conferences. I want to pad out the time. I want to go there for a week. So the trainers there organized lots and lots of customer meetings. It was fantastic. Brazil is an amazing country if you ever get the opportunity to go there. And I saw lots of great scrums, right? I saw lots of amazing scrum boards, or maybe Kanban boards. Maybe they were doing things like cumulative flow. Maybe there was some additional techniques around waiting, or bottlenecks are being identified, or those sort of things. So they were doing great Scrum, right? The daily scrums, though often in Portuguese, so I had to have a translator, looked great. They weren't all standing up, but they were awesome. They were inclusive. Everybody was talking. It was great. But I felt a little uncomfortable after the first day. It wasn't because of jet lag, though it may have been. It wasn't because we'd had far too many beers and far too much to eat the night before, though in Brazil you have to, because the food's amazing. It was because what I felt that was missing, I felt that there was a missing conversation about the customer. I felt the dailies were particularly focused on work, and good, bottlenecks, problems, handoffs, all this sort of stuff. I felt that there was no personas on the wall, for instance. There was no clearly articulated sprint goal. And or if there was, I couldn't find it easily. So the next few days, I spent my mission to discover this, right? So I asked questions about the sprint goal, and they were like, well, we like having a sprint goal. It's a really good idea, but we've got a lot of different things happening in this sprint. It's hard to have one objective, okay? We talked a little bit about the product backlog and how it was inspired. And we found that many plans were driving into this product backlog, and the product owner is really acting like a project manager. Fair enough. And that everybody was caring about the task complete. The definition of done was awesome, and they were using it extensively to sort of create the increment. That was great. But there was something missing about the customer. And they also said, well, that's the product owner's job, right? That's what Scrum says. I was like, well, no, actually, it's not. The product owner ultimately is accountable for ensuring that the team's delivering the most valuable things first, dealing with both the customer and the people that are paying for it, stakeholders, and any constraints, compliance, all that kind of stuff. They manage that and to ensure that the value is being delivered, but they're not the only people that talk to customers. Sometimes they're like Match.com, they introduce you to the right customers to talk to. They maybe facilitate conversations, but ultimately they aren't. Oh, that's interesting. And, then I looked at their product backlogs and it was full of tasks. Now, their sprint backlog, yeah, totally get that. No worries. I was like, how can there be loads of tasks in the product backlog when we don't know how we're going to solve these? Oh my gosh, let's look at the product backlog items. They were really focused on work, not outcome. And velocity was everywhere. Everybody was talking about velocity. And now velocity is awesome. I love it. I like story. Well, it depends. If you're gonna pay me by story points delivered, then I love story points because they're easy to cheat, right? But velocity is a great tool for a team or even a set of teams to sort of help them make decisions about capacity, about improvement, make decisions about retro. But it's not the reason why we're here. I don't care if you work efficiently. I care if you deliver value efficiently. Sometimes Scrum teams can be incredibly messy and it looks inefficient, but they're getting progress in terms of that value measure. So, yeah. And the other thing that I found, though I didn't actually attend any sprint reviews when I was in Sao Paulo, I have subsequently spent sometimes. One of the great things about everybody being remote is that you can go to things. So I asked a bunch of customers that we know and people that we have relationships. So I attended things like sprint reviews. I said, I just want to be a fly on the wall. And then they all talked about psychological safety and what that meant. And we went through this whole process, but after and privacy, and I had to fill in forms. But I managed to be a fly on the wall in some of these places. And I found that there was very rarely were there customers there at the sprint reviews. And the sprint review didn't really start with a sprint goal. It started with something else. Now, maybe this isn't the case in your situation. Maybe you have got a implementation of Scrum that doesn't look at all like this, or Agile that doesn't look at all like this. But I think that what I'm seeing is that we've taken that industrial mindset and we've said, oh, we've got Scrum, and we've used it really efficiently. And yes, there's obviously Jeff Sutherland's written some awesome books on, twice the work in half the time. Yes, you are more efficient using Scrum. Scrum can be a really good tool for doing that, but you're kind of missing something. So is your planning process driving this work backlog? Is your product owner acting like a project manager? Is the no sprint goal? Is the definition of ready? If you want to improve velocity, then have a maniacal definition of ready, because I will only work on stuff that is really clearly understood. Well, hang on a minute. Isn't the whole purpose of Scrum and the whole purpose of the world that we live in, and isn't the hard problems the interesting problems? If somebody said definition of ready, we'll never solve anything, will we? Because we have to have a clear understanding of the problem. We have to know all the stakeholders. We have to have some test data. We have to, that sounds awful. A no sprint goal and daily status meetings at the daily scrums, and then management come and review the work to make sure we delivered on what we said we were going to deliver, the commitments we made in the sprint planning session. And then we have a velocity meeting, the sprint retrospective. Sounds horrible. Water Scrum fall, it sounds a bit like. Sounds like the industrial mindset is being applied to Scrum. Now, I'm not saying it's bad per se, because you can still do some amazing things. Maybe you can improve the environment the team's working in, everybody gets happier. Maybe you can deliver lots of work, and that's good, but it makes the assumption that somebody knows what the best work is for you to work on. No, not in terms of the order, in terms of the product owner, that's different. I'm talking about that close connection between the Scrum team or the Agile team with value and understanding the value that we're trying to achieve. So it's interesting. Who knows? This is why value is so important. And there's some really smart, much smarter people than me that talk about this. Simon Sinek, you may know Simon. He's got a really nice new podcast series, which is really positive. makes you feel happy when you listen to it? I'm not sure I've learned anything, but I'm really happy. No, start with why. Obviously, he talks a lot about the importance of understanding the why and how that can change everything. Obviously, Dan talks about motivation, extrinsic motivation with autonomy, mastery, purpose. But ultimately, as a sort of Scrum guy, I suppose I am, I think that what this idea of value and why provides us with is an environment where self-management can happen, where give teams better flexibility to create different solutions. It gives us the space for innovation. It gets the 10, 12, 7, however many people in your Scrum team. These brains are awesome. Let's free them from the shackles of tasks and give them a pursuit of a mission and a clearly defined customer, and magic happens. You don't think that the people at the Broad Institute that were building that COVID test lab that my little boy Harry took advantage of, they had a clear product goal. They had daily sprints. They had clear goals for what they were trying to do. They failed horribly multiple times, particularly around some of the safety protocols initially, that they had to then go, what about this? They didn't have all the skills necessary. They didn't know what they knew until they knew they didn't know it. So there was a lot of sort of like kidnapping, as it were, where you phone someone and say, hey, could you help me? A lot of that kind of stuff. But this is the power. And of course, it improves the relationship between the customers or with the team, and it leads to ultimately better outcomes. We know this. Everybody knows this. I'm sure everybody sitting there in your houses all over the world or in Europe know this. But ultimately, then why don't we allow that to do it? Why, when we look at our backlogs, our product backlog, is everything described in terms of the work? Or why is it that we don't know who the customer is? Or if we grab different members of the team, we don't know the mission that we're all on. We don't know how we're contributing to some value that the customer seeks, or we can't articulate it. And why are we being measured on work, not outcomes? This is just the challenge that we live. And it's so important that we got even Ken and Jeff to change, which is not a mean feat, by the way. The addition of the product goal is a commitment to the product backlog. Some of you may have looked at the Scrum Guide recently, and hopefully you'll find it much better than the previous versions of the Scrum Guide. I think Ken and Jeff did a fantastic job improving it, working with a massive community of people who have very strong opinions. The things that I'm really excited about in the Scrum Guide, there's lots of things, particularly the how shorter it is, which is always groovy, right? But the one thing that I really care about is this sort of value-centric, outcome-oriented approach. And the two things that really stand out in the guide, there's some other things as well, but these two things are around the product goal being added. Now, the great thing about Scrum, right? You probably know this, but I'm going to bore you with this on a Friday afternoon before beers, is that it's about inspection and adaptation through transparency, right? We get that. So the reason why we have the artifacts that we have, and Stefan could talk about this much better than me, so I apologize, is because what we want to do is inspect and adapt them, which allows us to then improve, blah, 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 and to deliver the better product and team get better, etc. Now, we've always had a bit of a problem in Scrum that we never really inspected and adapted the purpose, the reason, the why, for why we're doing it, the product goal. So now we have it. Now, will it be right? Maybe, maybe not. Can it change? You bet. Does it give us a mechanism to have the conversation with stakeholders and maybe even the customer on why we're doing this and what we've learned from a sprint or a previous sprint or a release or whatever? Yeah, it gives us that ability. This amazing little thing that we don't tell you how to do it. Could it be a diagram? Could it be a part of a vision document? Could it be whatever? But it's clearly articulated. I don't think it can be too long. It has a boundary. It's measurable. The word goal is very, very important. We know when we've scored it. Obviously, the modern soccer has a little bit of issues with VAR now, but generally we know when we've scored it. It has a clear part of the game. We understand it. So hopefully that gives us a mechanism that we can inspect and adapt. And it's part of the product backlog. The other thing that's really cool, because as the Scrum team basically used to have something called a development team, which was very much an us and them with the product owner. I mean, the reality was it wasn't, but it was written in that way. We got rid of the development team, so now it's just one Scrum team. It was very clear that we didn't have in the sprint planning process anything that allowed us to really talk about why. Now, obviously, everybody did that. I mean, it goes without saying. Well, actually, does it? What we found in some situations, and I've seen this, is that the sprint planning really is a product owner just telling you what. This is what we want. This is what this sprint wants. And the team saying, well, we can do this, we can't do this. And it's very much focused on topic 2 and 3. By adding that topic 1, you get more people inspecting the incremental progress against the product goal, which is really, really cool. It makes everything more explicit, and you have that conversation, and it allows self-management, allows that sort of, it provides an environment for those things, which is cool. So I think we should do it. That's what I think. We should try to become more value centric. We should take advantage of the goal, sprint goal and product goal. We should make sure that we have time to review that frequently, daily. We should talk about the sprint goal for sure. And the sprint review should really look at that sprint goal and how it has delivered value, incremental progress against that product goal and what we have learned. If we do that, we're going to be in a better place. So if you're a leader, or you're talking to them, or you know one, these are the things I think we should do. Now, I'm going to do big jumps now. So I've been talking about that very much at the team level. Perhaps, though, those teams need to start thinking about how they're aligned and funded, because a lot of people say to me, yeah, that's great, Dave, but I support this application and the team supports this application, or this, which has a database and a this and a that if we're in software, or this, or I'm a marketing team, so I'm a service to lots of other teams. So so my backlog really is a collection of work from lots of different customer value streams, and then I collect that up and deliver that. Okay, that's fine. Maybe that is right for your organization. However, it's important to challenge that. If we can start aligning and it gets messy quickly because our organizations aren't built around these concepts. But if we could just start aligning to customer value streams or outcomes or customers, if we could build our tribes or our nexuses to that, it really, really helps, because then you can fund it in that way, which is really simplifies funding. You can make sure that the measures are in place that support that. And it's easier to connect vision and goals to that. And then it's easier then to build cross-functional teams that can align with that. And then that is easier then to encourage and allow transparency between the work and the customer, because everybody's pointing at that right direction. But it's not easy to do this. It's easier once you've done it. And even Scrum.org hasn't managed this at the moment. So we have a very deep tech team. It's got 4 people on at the moment, and website and e-commerce and privacy, and they do all sorts of techie things that I geek out with, and people don't understand what we're talking about. Those people. And then we have customer aligned teams that are professional Scrum trainers, or they service our assessment takers or their learning, which is the learning products that we have. Or now the tech team should be integrated into those teams, but it's not. And it's not because the tech team like to be a service. They like to serve lots of it. They like to work together with other people that are like them. They like the fact that they're using Jira and Confluence and Git, and they have all this infrastructure that they say, well, we can't do that because I don't want to be using, and all the other teams just use Trello and they very simple processes. They're like, no, we like to storm on things. We couldn't storm if we're like. So it's messy. If we broke it up, it would mean that there would have more sort of potentially more friction between those tech people. But wouldn't it be really good if we did get them into teams, because they could start influencing the strategy, the decisions that we're making on a daily basis? I'm hoping this is going to happen at Scrum.org. But it is messy. It's messy from an apps point of view, but it's, if you want to build agility, if you want to have highly focused teams that are really trying to deliver value and innovation to customers, it's necessary. So you've got to persuade your leaders, if you're not a leader, or take that jump to try to start doing them. If you're a team member, though, what can I do? I can't change the organization. I can't align it. I can't change the funding. Or we could change how we work, maybe. Or we can at least challenge some of the things. Let's have a look at whys in our backlog. Let's think about doing some persona work. Let's try to get access to some customers, even if you have to kidnap them and throw them into the back of the van and drive them to you. Or describe the sprint review as a happy hour, and then everybody comes. And then you just say, well, as we're all drinking, how about we review what happened in the last 2 weeks? I find that brilliant. We've tried that. When I tried to get Ken Schwaber to a sprint review, he loves chocolate and stuff like that. Bacon and candy is his life. And so what I did was I was like, hey, Ken, we had this face-to-face. We got lots of stuff here at the office. Come over, have a cup of coffee, say hi to the team. He appears. I'm like, oh, we just happen to be doing a sprint review now, Ken. He's like, damn you got me. But try to get some customers. Try to engage customers during the product owner isn't that gate. Try to start getting some other perspectives on the work you're doing. And you're responsible as a team member to learn about the customer as much as anybody else. And I love those things where, whether you give your personas cool names like members of the Beatles, or in my case, I'm a Leicester City fan, the greatest soccer team in the world. I try to give my personas the names of James Madison, Vardy. How does this help your customer? XXX. If you give them a cool name, it makes everybody laugh. Ask that continuously, because that helps us refine. And we talk a lot about T-shaped, pie-shaped, cone-shaped, in terms of the skills that human beings need to have in this post-industrial world. It's sort of the idea of the generalist, as it were. So what is that bar? Well, that bar, ultimately, that sort of cross is customer, is general. It's very different to when in 92, when I started work in the city of London. I was a software engineer. I got a spec, I wrote it. That isn't going to fly nowadays. I have to care about the customer. I have to get connected to the business. Doesn't mean I'm going to be an expert, but it means I'm going to bring curiosity to the conversations and not expect somebody else to be, well, this is what they decided. We're going to start building a better understanding. And that means we have to sort of change our focus from the industrial thing, which is all about defining requirements and getting them implemented and then shouting about why the software doesn't do what you want at the end, to really setting that vision, defining outcomes. Planning in detail, which is a very industrial thing, is more of a collaborative, continuous process with large amounts of transparency. And, historically, you sort of provided feedback to support for development marketing. You're going to be now more in that coach stance, asking those questions, helping them, the services outside of your team, which there always will be, helping them to understand context. And it means everybody needs to be responsible for doing UAT or working with those sort of things or running tests. Everybody cares about this. We're always testing those hypotheses. We're always testing the quality of the things that we do. And we need to put in place measures that help us do that. So I've talked about this as sort of industrial sort of mindset shift, the fact that Scrum had been sort of subverted, kicking and screaming into this industrial way of working, water scrum fall sort of thing, where it was really just work that we were doing in a really cool agile way, not outcomes. I talked a little bit about what that means and how we can change if you're a leader or a practitioner. And I talked about some of the changes that we're going to have to see. But it doesn't have to be a revolution. It's very easy for me. I mean, I have the best job in the world. I potter around the world, talking to people, listening, not as much as I should. I talk too much, perhaps, and trying to understand what they're doing and the like. I don't have to actually do any of this other than in my own organization, which also doesn't work properly, by the way, sometimes. It's really hard, but it doesn't have to be a revolution. Just think a little bit about the work that you're doing. Ask those questions, step back from the details sometimes and ask about context. Encourage everybody to think about the customer. And if you know something about the customer, teach it, share it, help people understand. Say, hey, there's an interesting thing I learned about the customer yesterday. Or, did you know everybody uses a tablet to access this? Who knew? Why would they? Because they're doing this. Or, did you know, etc. And then slowly we can move the team and the organization to solve problems about the customer. Now, measures are important. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time talking about this, but I do want to leave you with some thoughts about measurement. One way of driving change in an organization is to start thinking about the outcomes and the measures. So we have this thing called EBM, that sort of like a collection of ideas that maybe could be better, but we're working on it, sorry. And really in there, we talk about two types of things that we can help us. One is a capability to deliver value, and then the other is actually the value we're delivering. And that tends to be current and it tends to be unrealized. And we want to see those things changing. So current value being, maybe how many clicks we're getting or how many people are using that feature or whatever. Unrealized value being the opportunity that we have if more people are doing stuff in that way. And then an organizational capability, which is really two things, which is our ability to deliver, which is that time to market. And then what are we delivering? How much of the percentage of that is innovative, or how much of it is just fixing or messing up? And it's interesting because, I'm fortunate to drive a Tesla. What I see is that customer centricity. I also see the arguments in the hypothesis currently with the windscreen wipers, that we've got obviously two hypotheses about, the automatic windscreen wipers, whether they should go like this when it starts raining or should it go like this. And they're always releasing, but they release very frequently. And they have a measure, they survey me far too frequently, which is starting to annoy me at the moment, about what the value I'm getting out, in particular this windscreen wiper thing. And we understand, hopefully, what we're aspiring to every day. When in Tesla, their mission and their unrealized value is to get everybody on electric platform, everybody using that. So they're very focused on that. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about today. Hopefully, this is sort of interesting. I know that I'm sort of like last session, you're probably exhausted, you got Zoom fatigue or whatever the modern description of that. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see some of your faces, and maybe we've got a few minutes before the pubs. I don't know if you're still locked down in Germany. Can you go to the pub? I don't know.
Sort of. With recent tests, they set it up pp and then stand apart from each other and only do it outside. Currently, we have in Berlin about 12 degrees centigrade or 13 degrees, and so
dear. So that's a no then. Okay.
Probably,
but only for the most intrepid pub visitor. I like that, which is good. Well. So any questions or comments? Sorry, I haven't really been watching chat.
But I did. So Matthias is asking, so if there is a team that actually has too many different topics inside one sprint, can you suggest how to get to a sprint goal? So
really hard, isn't it? It's an absolute nightmare. And we see this all the time. So if I was a really smart person, I'd talk a little bit about focus. I'd reduce your sprint length and break down these things into, hey, for the next week, we're going to be focused on this set of topics and have a clear goal. And that's what we're going to do. And then the week after, we can then focus on the other one if it still makes sense after you did that first one. So if it's possible, one way of doing it is to serialize in some way and reduce sprint lengths to accommodate that. That can really, really help, because the things that you get out of focus is you get the ability to storm. You may, this is one criticism as well, you may be able to get people that normally don't work on this thing to work on it. Now you might say, well, that's inefficient. And obviously many people on this call are from Germany, and so we don't like inefficiency. When somebody's not good at something, they shouldn't be doing it. Well, actually, yes, they should sometimes, because you can start partnering, you can learn together. And it's like it's funny, my son has got a very severe learning disability, and so I'm trying to help him right now. I'm learning lots, even though I'm not a great teacher. That interaction of me trying to use this particular set of techniques is an amazing learning opportunity for me. And we all learn something together because of it. So my short answer is serialize the work, reduce your sprint size, and that sometimes means that it's going to be a little bit messy for a few sprints as we work on things perhaps we wouldn't normally work on. Try it.
There's another question. Andy points out the fact that burn downs and burnout graphs are still mentioned in the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, and would like to know whether Ken and Jeff are changing the goal and leave these bugs in, or what's behind it. So Andy believes that they shouldn't be mentioned at all.
Have you met Jeff Sutherland? Some of the challenges are historic, and some, hyper velocity and all those sort of words. Slowly catch the monkey, I think, is an expression my grandmother would use. I 100% agree with you. The Scrum Guide is not owned by Scrum.org or even Scrum Inc. or Scrum Alliance. It's owned by Jeff and Ken under a Creative Commons license. So you saw an incremental change, I think. But there's no reason, and hopefully it says that they're optional anyway. It doesn't say you must use them. You could use them, I think. I can't remember the actual wording. And maybe that changed in the German translation. I'm not a fan. However, I'd much rather use other things to describe progress, other things that are focused on outcomes, other things that identify impediments and the like. And I cycle those things as well. And Stefan would hopefully encourage me to do this, being a PST much more capable than me at these things, to try experiments. And particularly if your sprint's relatively short, then you have a time in the retro to say, hey, did that help? And sometimes you have to keep these things going for a couple of sprints, fair enough. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of burn down, but it depends. If you're going to pay me beers if I get a nice line, then I'm a fan, because I can make that do whatever, and then get into massive arguments about, whoa, what happens if I've done half a story, and should I show that? I mean, and breaking things down so that you can at least get some money back from, because you've delivered it, it sort of defeats the whole object. Ultimately, the team should be allowed to pick the things that make sense to them, to allow them to inspect the work that they're doing and the value that they're delivering, so that they can get better at both. And if that's the ultimate test. Now, obviously, when you start, you're going to have a lot of help on this, and you'll say, well, let's try this for a while. But over time, that should hopefully improve, so that it's the things that make sense in that context. Things like burn downs and burn up charts and the like seem to be an industrial perspective. And they are sort of, I always picture those, those slave boats going across, in the sort of Greek, and there's a guy banging the drum, and he's got a burn down chart behind him. I always picture that. And I don't like that. But when I first started in the 90s in London, there was this guy. He was very eccentric, and he didn't do much. But when he did, the world changed. He could write IBM assembler faster than anybody. He was asleep most of the time, but when he woke up, he was doing the crossword most of the time. He was like, and he just delivered so much value. So if you'd have looked at his burn down, I'd have gone, what are you doing on Monday and Friday and most of Tuesday? I don't know what he was doing, but he was incredibly valuable. I think they're sort of misleading.
Totally agree. Zanket is asking how to choose between a feature which the market team says has great revenue impact versus a technical debt in a sprint. Ooh.
That's really so let me see if I understand the question, so if I get this right. So the product owner has made a decision on what constitutes the most valuable thing, and but that valuable thing will ultimately end up hurting us in the future. Right? There's going to generate some level of debt, maybe. So what do we do? So historically, one interesting thing about earlier versions of Scrum with the idea of the development team is they always had that kind of like, hey, we won't do, you can tell us what the most valuable thing is, but we won't do things that are wrong for us. It was sort of like this sort of very XP, very Kent Beck kind of like customer professional integrity sort of friction thing. That's changed. Obviously, we're all one Scrum team now, very much focused on delivering value. So what do you do in situations like this? I don't know. It really depends. What I do know is that it's incredibly important for everybody to understand the impact that this thing's going to have, and to make those choices explicitly. Life is always going to be about compromise. It's always about trade-offs. The worst kind of compromise and the worst kind of trade-offs are ones that are not explicit. Because what tends to happen is things happen, or because he said, and blah, and then 3 sprints later, that's come to bite us later, and we go, well, hang on a minute. Well, I knew that was going to, because of this. And you say, why didn't you blimmin' tell me? And then we have this bizarre conversation about, sort of, well, next time I'll be more transparent. So I don't know what the ultimate solution is, other than what I do know is if you make things transparent, you have those conversations, you make a little bit of space to do it. You don't spend the entire sprint debating. You then all get on board and deliver. I think that's also important, to respect the decisions of the product owner, even if you disagree with them, after you've had the opportunity to make your point in the most transparent way, in a kind and respectful manner. If you do that, then we can move on. We make many choices at Scrum. We've got 340 trainers that are stakeholders who think that they know, but no, that do have interesting opinions. I listen to them. I try to build space to allow them to provide feedback, but I ultimately make the decision. And hopefully we've got an environment where everybody respects each other. And told you so isn't perhaps the best response from them afterwards, but when things go wrong later, but we can then all learn together. So make things transparent.
As the old adage goes, 6 trainers, 8 opinions, right?
Gosh, if only there was only 8. Yes.
Yeah, that was a restrained discussion. Right?
Yes. Time boxed, we like to say.
Yeah. Frank is back, and he rephrased the question. Is there a magic spell that makes people change their output-based thinking to a more outcome value-based thinking when common sense does not seem to work?
I love Frank. That's so, yes, common sense. If you've ever have any issues with common sense, just come to America for 10 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, yes, there is. It's called the customer. It's called building a good understanding of the customer, making it personal, making it about people. That's when the power really happens. When you make things about the people, it fundamentally changes it. And I'll tell you an example. So my wife used to work for a company called Biogen, and they had an MS drug that had to be recalled. And when they were doing the recall planning and everything, it was all very abstract. And she was like, okay, when she had her first phone call from a person who, stage 4 MS, am I going to die quicker? Because suddenly everything changed. Their entire focus was not just making sure that Biogen lost the least amount of money, though that was important. It was, how do we ensure that the customers, this experience to the customers is not horrible? So they got counselors. So they changed everything to be focused on that outcome. If you're building support software, maybe for a call desk or whatever, just spend 10 minutes on the call desk and you'll realize how important the stuff you're doing. If you're building an insurance app, think about the implications of miscategorizing a claim or making something more expensive so somebody can't afford to take it. Making it about the people. It's easy in my life because I have 340 people that are on Slack continuously with me, reminding me that I'm responsible for their livelihood, that my decisions have implications, that I don't understand the German or French market. Having that concept of person and having that connection, idea of the customer, helps. I don't know if it's a magic spell, but it changes everything.
Yeah, thank you for that. But the problem here is that I'm working for a service agency that is working for customers, and neither the agency I'm working with nor the customer itself seems to care about the user that's using the products. So no ideas get validated. There's just, we are working it because there's some money coming in and nobody's asking why are we doing it, and I'm talking and I don't seem to come forward with this.
Oh, Frank, that sounds awful. And and you know, thanks for bringing me down on my Friday. But so you've got two choices. The first one is really try to find somebody that you can help, and find somebody that the team can get behind to help. And you know, it means telling stories. It means, you know, doing analysis. It means, you know, creating that sort of understanding, and then just find somebody and find something that you can all rest your sort of hat on. Yeah. And the alternative is leave. I hate to say that. And I really do hate to say that, particularly in this pandemic age where it's all a bit, because ultimately it's just going to get harder and harder for you.
Yeah.
And more frustrating every day. And well, there is a third alternative, which is make a customer up for yourself and just pretend that this person, you know, maybe it isn't the end customer, maybe it's an intermediary, maybe the people that are on that help desk or doing that operational support that you provide services for, maybe the objective is to make their life easier. Which could be it. And then the other idea, which I've seen, which I don't particularly like, but people do, is it's all about making it the best environment for the team. So pick the work that's the most fun, that's the most intellectually challenging, and then at least you get a happy team, even if you end up delivering. You know, I sometimes think that the people that work on Excel do that. Because, you know, there's like, how many of those features does any human being use? But I'm sure they love them, because there's like a million things that nobody uses. And but I'm sure they're very intellectual, and like pivot tables. What mad psychopath invented that? I don't know. But yeah, so I can't really give you any really easy answers. You're obviously a smart dude, and you've seen all this. So see if you can find one. If you can't find one, leave. If you don't want to leave, then make something up. An intermediary sort of customers that aren't actually the real customer that you can help could be something. And then if all else fails, make it at least fun to do the work you're doing.
Yeah, as I'm seeing so much potential in the people working there, I'm not keen of giving up. So I take my shovel and dig for people to tell my story.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear, Frank. I love it. But you're right. Part of the reason why I love Scrum and Agile is that the art of the possible, that we can free these people to deliver value. And so we do this charity work with an organization called Year Up. Stefan knows a lot about this because I talk about this a lot. These kids have graduated high school, but they live in very difficult circumstances. Many of them are immigrants, many of them are African American, many of them live in the projects, maybe their parents are in prison, you know, awful stories that make you just cry. But we teach them Scrum. And people like Stefan teaches them Scrum, and we pay for it, and it's amazing. And I remember we're doing one thing in person, and their lives are challenging, right? And one of the students came to me and she said, "It's great what I've done. Last night I went and looked at all the challenges in my, you know, I want to get a job working in finance. So that's my product goal. And then what I did was I built a backlog." The art of the possible, right? We can empower people with that. The industrial mindset was really good at increasing lifespans and building bridges, and that we live amazing lives because of it. But now it's time to build on that and deliver value in ways that we've never thought about it. We've got loads of problems as a world, but the way we're going to solve it is find out what those problems are, understand who they're problems for to provide us with that motivation, that connection, and then deliver those teams with some tools that can help them do that. And amazing things can happen. So, my God, I got a little bit religious there, didn't I? Sorry about that. but we can, and people like you can.
Amen.
This is the great thing. Just think, if you help 10 people, you know, I feel sorry for Frank, but if he just helps 1 or 2 of those people to think about things differently, maybe they'll apply these things not in the work. They'll go to their church or their, you know, or wherever they, and they can help them, and that's going to have an outcome. Maybe they'll leave and go somewhere else where they can do that. That's the world that we live in, the art to give that. So that's the reason why I do Scrum, and that's the reason why I run scrum.org. And I'm very grateful for people like you doing all the real hard work to make it real. Sorry, Stefan, I sort of got sidetracked there. Thanks for that question, though, Frank.
No, that was excellent. Dave, thank you so much for being here
Frank's
and sharing your passion, because this is what I really like about you. So some people always have this belief that Scrum is all about agile project management. I said, no, it's not. It's about changing the world and helping people and improve the life of everyone. And
it really is.
Yes.
And it really is. And now, yes, we do the project management stuff, and yes, sometimes it's a drudge and a trudge, but it is those moments where we're like, oh, we've just delivered this increment. Oh my God, look at that change. Isn't it great? Okay, anyway.
Totally is.
Any other questions? Are we done? What's the story, Simon? You're the boss.
So we're pretty much through with questions, I believe.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking the time. I know that the world is a very busy place. We've all got a million commitments, you know, and everybody wants to Zoom us every 5 seconds. So I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days. And I looked at the agenda. I couldn't, unfortunately, attend some of it, but I saw some of the amazing speakers. So I'm very grateful. Thanks, Stefan, for organizing this. I appreciate that. And
my pleasure.
I think it's really, oh yeah, we do jazz hands now, don't we? I'm sorry. That's thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Hopefully I wasn't too boring, and for the more intrepid, I appreciate you're gonna be able to go to the pub later. So thank you, and have a great weekend.
Likewise, Dave.
Bye-bye. Auf Wiedersehen.
Fabulous.
Bye.
Thank you.